Hello and welcome to Great Britain in Focus. My name is James McCullough.
And I'm Alex Cooper.
So welcome back, Alex, after a brief absence away from the hot seat.
Thank you for the warm welcome, and it's really good to be back, particularly today when we're speaking about C.S. Lewis and a man who knew him.
Yes, indeed. We spoke to Walter Hooper, who recently passed away. We spoke to him about C.S. Lewis. Walter Hooper was an author, an American author, who came to Britain, to Oxford, to meet C.S. Lewis and write a book about him. He ended up staying in Oxford for the rest of his days and becoming the private secretary to C.S. Lewis. So now we're going to hear an interview with Walter Hooper about his life and the life of C.S. Lewis.
And the interesting little details that are going to be coming out about C.S. Lewis's kind of approachement to the Catholic Church, and also Walter's own journey to the faith.
Yes, indeed. So let's join Kevin Turley in the home of Walter Hooper.
Walter, welcome to EWTN GB, Great Britain.
Yes.
And thank you so much for welcoming us into your beautiful home here on the outskirts of Oxford. Yes. I visited the kilns a number of years ago.
Yes.
And they've lovingly restored it
Yes.
and recreated this sort of ambience that C.S. Lewis and his brother and various others lived in.
Yes.
There's one thing that struck me though. We were shown C.S. Lewis's bedroom at the front of the house.
Yes.
And I was struck at how small it was, first of all. The bedroom seemed very small by modern standards. But on the wall there was a picture of the face from the Shroud of Turin. Were you aware of, when you were with C.S. Lewis, of his views on Catholicism?
Yes and no. I mean, I knew that he was he went to confession, and he had a duty to the Turin Shroud. But and I knew because he gave me the book. I mean, right after he finished writing it, at which he talked about Letters to Malcolm is his last book, and there he discusses the dream of Gerontius, and he discusses a lot of it. I mean, and he believed clearly in purgatory and the real presence.
Your own journey, Walter, has been from, I don't know, were you an Anglican, an Episcopalian to begin with?
Yes.
And you were received into the Catholic Church, I believe, in 1988.
That's right, yes.
Do you think that journey was influenced by C.S. Lewis?
Well, yes, it was, because he was very upset in 1946 when the Anglicans first created a priestess, a woman priest, and he was afraid that this was what was going to happen with the Lambeth Conference. And so he wrote to Dorothy Sayers and said, "This pigeon is for you, because I think a woman should write about, what a danger this is." And she said, "Well, I hate to disappoint you," but she said, "But you see, I approve of it." And so he had to write it himself. So he wrote Priestesses in the Church, as I've called it. And he spent a lot of time on that. And, if you compare it with, the Vatican document, Inter Insinuores, it's almost word for word. I mean, the same as inter insinuores, which is the Vatican II document. And of course he says that, the priest stands in persona Christi.
That's right.
And this is the same thing, and but there's, if you read John Paul II by George Weigel, it really is very clear, right halfway down. Bishop Runcie is asked to be careful about ordination of women, because you could separate yourself from the Catholic Church. But Runcie said that he had been in touch with all of the heads of Anglicanism throughout the country, and they all believed, as Dorothea Sayers had said, that each priest represents humanity, not anything else.
What were the things, Walter, that moved you to ultimately enter into full communion with the Catholic Church?
Well, first of all, the Anglicans say different things. I was just getting pleased with the fact that the Bishop of Oxford doesn't believe in abortion, but then another Anglican bishop does believe in it. And so you can't find anybody that agrees with anything. There were 2 or 3 or 4 sides of every argument. And, I thought, this is true of Anglicanism, regarding the ordination of women. The Americans believed in it, and they started, their church is ruined by that. And so I could see it happening here. But I thought, here down the road is St. Aloysius' church. They at least believe something clearly. And they believe. I just wanted them to talk about right and wrong. I would be pleased if they just talked about right and wrong as I believe as a child, right and wrong.
It's funny in a way that, because when you were talking about your first encounter with C.S. Lewis, you were talking about how your conversations were about clarifying things.
Yes.
And this need for things to be clear, logically and emotionally clear. And it's interesting that your journey to the church is for that clarity too, in a sense. Do you think C.S. Lewis, if he had lived, would the clarity, as Anglicanism became more confused about things or on issues, do you think the clarity might have led him in a certain direction?
I think it would have led him to Catholicism, because I think he accepted what the Anglicans believed, but then they were guiding their people to an unknown land, and I don't think he could have stood it, and one of the things that I like very much about John the 23rd is in opening the Vatican Council, Second Vatican Council, he said, the deposit of faith and the truths of a venerable tradition one thing. The Annunciation is another, but always with the same sense and meaning as the deposit of faith. And I think this is what Lewis believed. This is what he believed, and very clearly. His enunciations, of the Screwtape Letters and the Narnian stories, you cannot find a simple one story in the Narnian stories that a Catholic couldn't have written. And I don't think there's a single thing in the Narnian stories that a Catholic wouldn't agree with.
Walter, thank you very much.
Yes.
The Eucharist is my highway to heaven, said recently beatified Carlo Acutis. Carlo is a personal hero of Father Alexander Sherbrooke, who is the parish priest at St Patrick's in Soho, London. I had the great privilege of actually living in Father Alexander's community for a little while, and no day starts without Eucharistic adoration. And it is in that context that we also speak to the mother of Carlo in a really, really interesting interview.
Yes, indeed. Father Alexander refers to Carlo Acutis as a sign of our times, meaning that he brought so many young people to the love of God through his deep Eucharistic spirituality. Father Alexander also mentions the fact that Carlo Acutis was born in London in 1991 and died at the age of 15. But he really draws out the connection with London and with the young people of London.
And there's no better place to bring church and young people together than St Patrick's in Soho. Let's have a look.
My name is Father Alexander Sherbrooke, and I am the Parish Priest of St Patrick's in Soho in London, where I have been since 2001. Some 4 years ago, I went to Arundel Cathedral and I saw an exhibition there of Eucharistic miracles, and it was fascinating, it was beautiful, it was very well portrayed. And it reintroduced me to something which is very important in our Catholic life. At the time, I didn't think much about how it came to be constructed, but I did see the picture of a young Italian boy, and he had been responsible for this. Anyway, in the last perhaps 6 months, I have become much more aware of this young man who is now known as Blessed Carlo Acutis, and his life and his contribution to the proclamation of the gospel. We haven't had many saints who have been born in London. You can visit the place that Cardinal Newman was born. It's now in the city of London, the heart of a square mile. Obviously, many of our martyrs were probably born in London, but recent times, not many saints. Carlo was born in London. He was baptized on the 18th of May in the church of Our Lady of Dolours in the Fulham Road. He didn't live in London for very long, perhaps only 6 months, and he never returned to London. As part of this journey of promoting Eucharistic adoration at St Patrick's, I was given the joy of being able to speak to his mother on the telephone. And as you look at his mother, I think it's extraordinary. 2 things. First of all, this was a woman who said, I hardly ever went to church until Carlo started to take me. She now goes every day, prays the rosary every day, goes to adoration every day. And I thought, how extraordinary to see how this young boy had evangelized his mother. The second thing that really struck me is how she speaks very beautifully about how she wants Carlo to come back to London, where he was born, to speak to the young people of London, to speak to the young people of St Patrick's at Soho, but also to speak very much to the Anglosphere. So his mother speaks of how she really feels that from heaven, Carlo is asking for this to happen?
Carlo was born in London because my husband was working in a merchant bank. And Carlo, of course, after 1 year that we have got married in 1990, in 1991, Carlo was born the 3rd of May of 1991. So in a certain way, he had a special connection with London. And also because my mother-in-law is half English and half Polish. So the fact that she's half Polish and half English is also a further connection with these two big nations.
Cosa ne pensa del Beato Carlo che torna a Londra, incontra i giovani di Soho e dà loro speranza e gioia per il futuro?
Carlo was a witness of God, of the love of God. So he witnessed the love of God in his life. So it's a hope, it's a sign of hope, because we have to understand that we have been created for God. So to understand this in our life means to become happy, to become a realized person. And this is the secret. So the fact that he will meet these young people in Soho, in a certain way come back in London, no? Because unfortunately Carlo, after he was born in London, and then he never he never had the chance to visit when he was grown London, no? So in a certain ways, he returned in London, in England, but beatified. No? It's strange, that he didn't return before. But I think it's a sign of his connection with England, because also the exhibition on Eucharistic miracle of Carlo is going around England. So also this, I think, is a big sign. England and United States especially. So I think Carlo has a big connection with the Anglophone countries, because probably of his English roots. My grandmother was born in New York. So, I mean, probably this is a big connection.
There are many, many things that one could say about him, but I think just from a very personal point of view, I happened to go to Italy just after his beatification in Assisi, and I was able to visit the church of the Spogliamento. That is the church where St. Francis stripped himself of his garments in front of the Bishop of Assisi. Anyway, there you see the open coffin of Blessed Carlo. And as you look at him, you see this very youthful-like young man. He was 15 when he died of leukemia. But as you look at him, you think, this boy I could have met playing a game of football down the road. So he is contemporary. He is fun, he laughs, but also his life was infinitely attractive as you find out more about it.
Carlo had a very ordinary life, but like each one of us, if we have every one of us has an ordinary life, but if we allow the absolute to enter inside our life, even an ordinary life can become extraordinary, because when we open the doors to Jesus, to the grace, each life become extraordinary. So Carlo had this merit to have understood that without Jesus we cannot do anything. And the great merit of Carlo is that he really understood this. He used to go each day to the Mass, to the celebration, to nourish himself with the Holy Eucharist, which is the source of love, the source of our sainthood, because in the Blessed Sacrament we have the real presence of God. So when we eat the Eucharist, because Jesus transforms us, Jesus make us always more similar to Him. So this is very important, because Jesus wants our free will. So He doesn't want to oblige us to become to love Him. But when we open ourselves, we open our doors to Jesus, He can do fantastic things. So Carlo had this merit. And of course, like Saint Teresa of Jesus, the little Teresina, no? She used to say that she wanted at the beginning to do many things. She wanted to become a missionary. She wanted to go there and to do this. But she understood that the most important thing is to love. The love. Everything you do, if you do loving, is fantastic. So Carlo, in a certain way, was a disciple of this saint, this little saint Teresa, and understood that or even the most, normal things, if you do loving, with loving God and loving our friend, our brother and sister, so everything can become really extraordinary.
So there was something incredibly human about him. But also, of course, what is so extraordinary about him is that this young boy has brought many to know the love of God. And what was absolutely central to Blessed Carlo is the call before anything else to love God, and to love God in Eucharistic adoration. And through that basic encounter, that dialogue, that meeting, then we come to know who we truly are. When we are created at the beginning of time, we believe that we are created as individuals. Our own beauty, our own character, our own definition, if you like. And many of the forces of our modern world want to coerce us into being the same, the herd mentality, the group mentality. And as a result, it becomes much more difficult to establish your personal identity with God. It's rather like when you look at fashion. I live in Soho and you see fashion all the time. It's fascinating, but there's always a sameness. There's nothing particularly unique in how people dress. And that speaks very powerfully of how coercive fashion and group and herd mentality is, which takes us away from the gospel. And it is that individuality that God gives us and that so much of the world wants to destroy. Carlo, through his apostolate of spreading Eucharistic adoration, of the Eucharistic miracles, is an extraordinary sign for our times.
Carlo used to say that the Eucharist is my highway to heaven. And he understood that in the Eucharist there is really the source of the grace, because the Eucharist, in the Blessed Sacrament, there is the real presence of God, no? And God promised us, Jesus promised us in the Gospel, I will be with you till the end of the world. And he maintained this promise. He stays with us. But we know for the faith that here there is in the consecrated host there is the real presence of God. It's not a symbolic presence. It's not a sign of his presence, but it's the real presence of God. So that is incredible. For Carlo was incredible. Carlo used to live his life at the presence of God. Each minute of his life he never forget this. So this was the extraordinary of Carlo.
One of the greatest joys of my priesthood, and also as a seminarian, is that I was able to have spent much time with the Missionaries of Charity, and in particular before she died with Mother Teresa of Calcutta, both here in London, in Rome, and most significantly in Calcutta. And being with her, in one particular case for a concentrated 2 weeks, I was able to watch her very closely. And I always remember watching her that all the time she was fixated to know where the Blessed Sacrament was. If she was going to a church that she hadn't been to before, if she was going to one of her homes, if she was walking through the main house in Calicut, she would always stop at the Blessed Sacrament. So she was absolutely obsessed by allowing Jesus to work through her. And therefore, when we look at the work of St. Teresa of Calcutta, we see a deep synergy, if you like, between the caring of the poor, the poorest of the poor, and the presence of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament. Blessed Carlo is another example of St. Teresa of Calcutta. What I see in him, I see, and we can see in so many saints in the life of a church who have had a deep Eucharistic spirituality. It is through being with the Blessed Sacrament, being with Jesus, that the two fall in love with each other. Christ has already fallen in love with us, and we are called to fall in love with him. And it is through that intimacy, if you like, what Mother Teresa used to say, she talked about cleaving to Christ, becoming literally the spouse of Christ. And when Carlo meets God in that Eucharistic moment, he then takes him into the marketplace. And that is the work for us as Christians in this time, more than ever. We often speak about thirst and hunger. Yes, most certainly so. People have a deep thirst for Christ without necessarily knowing it. But when we meet him, we know that we've met beauty. And so what I hope and pray through this beautiful opportunity of reopening the church, of calling people to Eucharistic adoration, that people will be inspired by Carlo, who want to be like him. But also, of course, most importantly, that they will meet the Lord in Eucharistic adoration. And through that meeting, the Lord will teach them, show them how to be their own Carlo in their own place at this time.
So I hope that this presence of Carlo in England will be helpful and will help this person to understand that the grace of God is among us, because really God is always with us. I assure you my prayers and ask you also to pray for the canonization of Carlo.
Thank you for joining us. Full versions of these interviews will be made available across our social media platforms soon. EWTN Great Britain is a self-funded charity, and we rely on the generosity of our viewers.
And thanks to your feedback, we know quite how much our programming has actually meant to you in these difficult times. So with that in mind, go to our website, ewtn.co.uk, and click the donate button. Have a really blessed week. Goodbye.
And God bless.